Today we'll be taking notes on heredity and genetics. So let's get you thinking. What are some characteristics that you have in common with your mom or dad? Think about your hair color, your eye color, your smile, the shape of your nose. Do you have a widow's peak? All of these qualities are what we call traits. So the definition of traits is a distinguishing quality that can be passed from one generation to another. So it's what you receive from your mom and dad. Examples: your hair color, eye color, shape of your nose, shape of your lips, shape of your face, how tall you are, and there's many other things, many other types of traits. So in your notes today, you're going to want to turn to the next clean page of your ISN. That's your science notebook. And when you see the page that looks like this one, this is what you really need to have written down into your notes for heredity and genetics. Okay, so we're going to write down today that a trait is a quality that can be passed from one generation to the next. Examples will be eye color, hair color, and face shape. Again, these are just a few. There's many more traits that we will talk about in this unit. If at any time during this video you feel that you need extra time, please press pause on the video. You can always resume the notes by pressing play, and you can start when you're ready to move on. Now, I've also added another definition and term for this unit. It is generation. So what is a generation? It is organisms born and living in the same time period. Okay, for example, your grandparents is one generation, your parents would be the next generation, and then the children, which would be you, you're the next generation. Okay, again, if you need extra time while creating your notes in your ISN, just push pause and you can push play when you're ready to move on. Okay, so what is heredity? Heredity is the passing of traits from one parent to offspring. Remember, offspring are the babies, the children. Example is the mommy cat and the daddy cat passed on their gray hair to the baby cat. So we've got the mom cat over here, and then we've got a dad cat, and guess what? The baby cat also has gray hair. So what we want to add into our ISN for notes today on heredity is that it is the passing of traits from parent to offspring. In parentheses, I put baby, so we knew that offspring meant baby. What are genetics? Genetics are the study of heredity, or how traits are passed from one parent to offspring. An example is a doctor who studies genetic disorders, or who studies what happens when genes do not get copied correctly. So again, when we're talking about genetics, we're just talking about the study of heredity. What you want to enter into your ISN today is that genetics is the study of passing of traits and heredity. Okay, and remember the definition of heredity is the passing of traits from parent to offspring. If you need extra time while you're writing your notes, please press pause. You can always press play again when you're ready to move on. Gregor Mendel. Now this is an important scientist here, okay? He is considered the father of genetics. He worked with pea plants to study heredity. Mendel looked at different plant heights and what happened when they were pollinated together. First, he took tall pea plants and cross-pollinated them with another tall pea plant. And the results that he got was the baby, the offspring plant, would be a tall pea plant. So here we have a tall pea plant. He cross-pollinated it with another tall pea plant. And we, as an offspring, we have another tall pea plant. Okay, for your ISN notes, we need to write out today that the father of genetics is Gregor Mendel. Mendel studied heredity in pea plants, okay? And please go ahead and write this down, that the first tall pea plant was cross-pollinated with another tall pea plant, and the offspring was another tall pea plant, okay? So we can see that the trait of the plant being tall was passed down from parent to the offspring. Okay, another study that Gregor Mendel conducted was he took a short pea plant and cross-pollinated with another short pea plant, and guess what the result was? He had an offspring of a short pea plant. So short plus short will equal short. So these two plants, they are cross-pollinated together. These are the parent plants, the parent organisms. Once they are combined together, they will pass on the trait of being short. So in your ISN today, for Mendel studying heredity in pea plants, the second example is a short pea plant cross-pollinated with another short pea plant, and it will yield, the offspring will be another short pea plant. Okay. You may write down these words. If you'd like to draw out the images, it might be helpful. I know that that's the type of learner that I am. It helps me to have images. So if you need extra time while writing these notes out, just press pause and you can press play when you're ready to move on. Okay, and another third experiment, Mendel takes a tall pea plant. Now he cross-pollinates it with the short pea plant. Let's see what's going to happen. And what he noticed in this investigation is that the offspring pea plant would be tall. Okay, so the conclusion here is that tallness, okay, this tall trait, would be dominant over the short trait. Okay, we're going to learn a little bit more about dominant traits versus recessive traits in just a second. For your ISN entry, make sure that you have this third investigation. Gregor Mendel takes a tall pea plant, cross-pollinates it with a short pea plant, and the result will be a tall pea plant. So we have a tall pea plant plus a short pea plant equals a tall pea plant. The conclusion, though, that Gregor Mendel had is, hey, the tall trait will be the dominant trait. That's what's going to show up. Okay, let's take a look at DNA. DNA is a long, thin strand that contains the hereditary information that makes you up. It's found in the nucleus of a cell. Another way that we can define DNA, it is a molecule that contains the instructions an organism needs to develop, live, and reproduce. These instructions are found inside the nucleus of every cell and are passed down from parents to their children. For your ISN entry, for your notes, DNA is a molecule that contains the instructions to develop, live, and reproduce. These instructions are found inside the nucleus of every cell and are passed down from parents to their children. I did add a picture on the right-hand side of this page because I want you guys to see that strand of DNA. It looks like a twisted ladder. Okay? We'll talk more in depth of what we see on DNA in just a second. So, what are genes? Genes are a small section of DNA on a chromosome that has information about a trait. So we see this twisted ladder again, and if you see there's different sections here. So we have gene 1, okay, in this section of the DNA, and gene 2. Now a chromosome, it looks to me like kind of like a puffy H or an X, okay? Now chromosomes are made up of a bunch of these strands, coiled up strands of DNA, okay? So when we take a look at it, we've got a chromosome that's made up a bunch of coiled up DNA. And when we take a look at the DNA, it looks like a spiral twisted ladder. And then on the DNA itself, we have different sections that are made up of genes. Okay? So for your ISN entry, a gene is a small section of DNA found on a chromosome that has information about a trait. If you would like to draw this out in your ISN to have that extra image for reinforcement, please do so. Remember, if you need extra time, press pause. You can always resume play when you're ready to move on. Chromosomes. Chromosomes are a rod-shaped structure made up of coiled DNA that carries the information that controls inherited characteristics. For your ISN, please write down that a chromosome is a rod-shaped structure made up of coiled up DNA. If you would like to draw out another image, please do so at this time. Okay, now copies of genes. You have 2 copies of a gene. You get one from your mother and one from your father. Chromosomes are made up of genes. For your ISN entry, please write down that you have 2 copies of a gene, one from your mom and one from your dad. Again, the way that the chromosome looks, it is a rod. To me, it always looks like a puffy H or possibly an X. Chromosomes are made up of coiled up DNA. When we take a look again at the DNA, it looks like a twisted spiral ladder. And what we will find on that DNA are different genes. Now, let's talk about dominance. okay? Because you're going to start hearing about dominant and recessive traits, okay? Dominant means that one form of a trait covers up or masks another form of a trait. It's often written as a capital letter, like capital T. Pure dominance is when an organism has two dominant genes for a single trait, so meaning that they get one dominant gene from mom, one dominant gene from dad. Example would be a tall pea plant dominates over a short pea plant. We saw that earlier with Gregor Mendel's third investigation. Took a tall pea plant and cross-pollinated with a short pea plant. But what we ended up with was a tall pea plant because that tall trait that was received from one of the parent organisms, it dominates over the other. So you'll see the tall, okay? If you have parents that have both dominant traits, you'll see capital T, okay? So for your notes today, please write down that the dominant trait is one form of a trait that covers up or masks the other trait. The dominant trait is what is seen. The dominant trait is written with a capital letter, example, capital T. Pure dominance is when an organism has two dominant genes, example, capital T, okay? We'll talk more about this in just a little bit. Examples of dominant traits that we would see, guys, would be like dark hair, brown eyes, curly hair, maybe some baldness. Okay, now we'll talk about recessive traits. It means that one form of a trait is covered by another form of a trait. They are only seen when a trait is recessively pure, little t, okay? The recessive trait is always covered up unless you're receiving the recessive trait from both mom and dad. A recessive trait is often written as a lowercase letter. Example, blonde hair is a recessive trait. For your ISN entry today, and again, press pause if you need extra time. Recessive is the trait that is being covered up or masked. It is written as a lowercase letter. Example, lowercase t. Only seen when they are recessively pure. Okay, so unless we have little t, we're not going to see that recessive trait. Examples of recessive traits are blonde hair, blue eyes, a straight hairline, round eye shape, attached earlobes, and the inability to roll your tongue. If you need extra time, please pause the video at this time. You can always resume when you're ready to move on. Okay, what is a hybrid? A hybrid means that the organism has one dominant gene and one recessive gene for a single trait, often written as a capital and lowercase letter. So when you see capital T, lowercase t, that will be seen as tall, okay, but it is a hybrid because it's a combination of a dominant trait and a recessive trait. The dominant chromosome will dominate over the recessive chromosome. For your ISN entry today, please write down hybrid. It's the organism that has both the dominant gene and recessive gene for a trait, written with the capital and lowercase letter. An example would be an uppercase T and a lowercase t. We will use other letters when we are writing down whether it's a dominant or recessive, but at this time, I'm just using T as an example. Okay, here's another example, big uppercase B, brown hair, because that is the dominant trait. Brown hair is dominant, but blonde hair is recessive, so it would take a lowercase b. So dad has purely dominant brown hair. So from his parents, he received two dominant traits, right? Two dominant genes. So he's uppercase B, okay? Capital B. But mom has purely recessive hair, so she'll be lowercase b. Remember, for blonde hair to show up and be seen, it has to be purely recessive. So it's always going to be two lowercase. Okay, but now they have a child together, and the child is going to be a hybrid, okay, because it got a big B from dad and a lowercase b from mom, the dominant and recessive genes. So a big B and a little b will show the dominant trait, okay, because remember, the dominant trait covers up the recessive trait, the lowercase b. So the child will have brown hair. Okay, for your ISN entry, I do need you to copy this in, same thing that we saw on the last slide. Okay, and take your time. Push pause if you need extra time. Okay, let's talk about genotypes and phenotypes because you're going to be hearing those words in this unit as we are moving through this unit. Okay, a genotype is the letter representation. So when you see big B, or big B, or little b, that's a genotype, okay? It's just a letter representation of what traits are being represented. Now, the phenotype is what you actually see, okay? It's the actual physical appearance of the trait. So black eyes, the genotype would be big B, little b, could be big B, but the phenotype is what we see. So just remember, genotype is talking about a letter combination representation of the genes, and the phenotype is what we actually see in person. Okay, for your ISN entry, you're going to write this exact slide out. Genotype is the letter representation. Give us an example, big B, little b. Okay, genotype could be little b. It could be big B. Okay, but it's a two-letter representation of the gene. And phenotype is, again, just what we physically see. Black eyes, brown eyes, blue eyes, blonde hair, brown hair. Okay, so it's the actual physical